Modern world is associated with rapid technological changes and innovations, machines and factories, railways and steamships. Industrialization meant development. Images depicted triumphant account of the modern world. Aladdin represents East and the past. The mechanic stands for the West and modernity. Proto-industrialization. Even before factories began in England and Europe, there was large-scale industrial production for international market and is referred to as proto-industrialization. In the 17th and 18th centuries, merchants persuaded peasants and artists in the countryside to produce for an international market. In the countryside, poor peasants and artisans began working for merchants. As open fields and commons disappeared, by working for the merchants, they could supplement their income and remain in the countryside. It also allowed them a fuller use of their family labor resources. Within this system, a close relationship developed between the town and the countryside. Merchants were based in towns, but the work was done mostly in the countryside. London was known as a finishing center. This proto-industrial system was thus part of a network of commercial exchanges. Purchased wool from a wool stapler. Wool was taken to the spinners where the yarn was spun. Spun yarn was taken to weavers for weaving cloth. Woven cloths were taken to the fullers. Cloth was dyed by dyers. Finishing was done in London. The finished cloth was sold in the international market. A merchant clothier in urban England. The proto-industrial network of commercial exchanges was controlled by merchants. Goods were produced by producers working within their family farms, not in factories. At each stage of production, 20 to 25 workers were employed. This meant that each clothier was controlling hundreds of workers. The coming up of the factory. By late 19th century in England, cotton production boomed because of a large number of changes in the process of production. Inventions increased the efficacy of each step of the production process: carding, twisting, and spinning and rolling. This enhanced output per worker and led to production of stronger threads and yarn. Let's observe the given table. Proto-industrialization. Production was spread all over the countryside. Village households carried out production of goods. All members of the family were involved in production. Supervision, quality control, etc. was not possible. Production was limited. Industrialization. Production was carried out in mills and factories. New machines in mills carried out production. Mill workers were involved in production of goods. Careful supervision, watch over quality, and the regulation of labor was possible. Production increased many folds. Pace of industrial change. The most dynamic industries in Britain were cotton and metals. Cotton was the leading sector. Later, with the expansion of railways, iron and steel industry held the sway. By 1873, Britain was exporting iron and steel worth about 77 million pounds, double the value of its cotton export. New industries could not easily displace traditional industries. At the end of the 19th century, less than 20% of the total workforce was employed in technologically advanced industrial sectors. A large portion of the textile output was produced within domestic units and not in factories. Pace of change in the traditional industries was set by seemingly ordinary and small innovations in many non-mechanized sectors such as food processing, building, pottery, glasswork, tanning, furniture making, and production of implements. Even the most powerful new technology that enhanced the productivity of labor manifold was slow to be accepted by industrialists. New technology was expensive and merchants and industrialists were cautious about using it. The machines often broke down and repair was costly. They were not as effective as the inventors claimed. Handmade versus machine-made. In Victorian Britain, there was plenty of labor and wages were low. Industrialists did not want to introduce machines that required large capital investment. In many industries where demand for labor was seasonal, as production fluctuated with the season, industrialists preferred hand labor, employing workers for the season. Machines were oriented to producing uniform, standardized goods for a mass market, but the demand in the market was often for goods with intricate designs and specific shapes which required human skill, not mechanical technology. In Victorian Britain, the aristocrats and the bourgeoisie preferred things produced by hand. Handmade products came to symbolize refinement and class. They were better finished, individually produced, and carefully designed. Machine-made goods were for export to the colonies. In 19th century America, there was labor shortage. Industrialists were using mechanical power so that the need for human labor could be minimized. Life of the workers. The abundance of labor in the market affected the lives of workers. With news of jobs, people migrated from the countryside to the cities where finding a job and place to stay was difficult. Seasonal work meant prolonged periods without work. The poor looked for odd jobs, which till the mid-19th century were difficult to find. Wages increased in the early 19th century. Average daily income of workers depended on the wage rate and period of employment. Till the mid-19th century, about 10% of the urban population was extremely poor. In periods of economic slump, unemployment went up to 35 to 75%. The fear of unemployment made workers hostile to the introduction of new technology. When the spinning jenny was introduced in the woolen industry, women who survived on hand spinning began attacking the new machines. This conflict over the introduction of the jenny continued for a long time. After the 1840s, due to intensified building activity, greater opportunities of employment opened up. The number of workers employed in the transport industry doubled in the 1840s and doubled again in the subsequent 30 years. The age of Indian textiles. Before the age of machine industries, silk and cotton goods from India dominated the international market in textiles. Fine cotton from India was carried by merchants to Afghanistan, Eastern Persia, and Central Asia on camelback via the north-west frontier through mountain passes and across deserts. Main pre-colonial ports were hubs for vibrant sea trade. Surat on the Gujarat coast connected India to the Gulf and Red Sea ports. Masulipattnam on the Coromandel coast and Hooghly in Bengal had trade links with Southeast Asian ports. Then Indian merchants and bankers controlled export trade network. Supply merchants procured woven clothes against advance payment. Brokers in port towns negotiated price for shippers and export merchant. By 1750s, network controlled by Indian merchants started breaking down. With European companies gaining power, old ports of Surat and Hooghly declined and ports at Bombay and Calcutta grew. Trade through these ports was controlled by European companies. Only those Indian trading houses survived which operated within a network shaped by European trading companies. What happened to weavers? In the 1760s, Indian textiles were in demand in Europe. East India Company had difficulty in ensuring a regular supply of goods for export. But when East India Company got political power, it strengthened its monopoly through right to trade by system of management and controlled that eliminated competition, controlled costs, and ensured regular supplies of cotton and silk goods. The company eliminated the existing traders and brokers and established a more direct control over the weaver. They appointed a paid servant, Gomastha, to supervise weavers, collect supplies, and examine the quality of cloth. The company prevented its weavers from dealing with other buyers. An advance was given with the order placed to the weavers. Due to the loan taken, weavers lost the space to bargain for prices and sell to different buyers. The price they received from the company was miserably low, and the loans they had accepted tied them to the company. Manchester comes to India. Demand for Indian textiles reduced as cotton industries developed in England. Industrial groups pressurized the government to impose import duties on cotton textiles. They also persuaded East India Company to sell British goods in Indian markets. Exports of British cotton goods increased dramatically in the early 19th century. Export market of Indian cotton weaver collapsed. The local market shrank as it was being glutted with cheap machine-made Manchester imports. By the 1860s, weavers could not get sufficient supply of raw cotton of good quality. By end of 19th century, weavers and other craftspeople faced competition from Indian factories which began production. Factories in India. 1850s onwards, many cotton mills came up in Bombay and other cities in India. Around the same time, jute mills came up in Bengal. Industries were set up by Indians who had accumulated money by working as junior partner for British trade with China and other countries. Due to colonial control over Indian trade, Indian merchants were barred from trading with Europe in manufactured goods and had to export raw materials and food grains required by the British. Till the First World War, European managing agencies controlled Indian industries. The European merchant industrialists had their own chambers of commerce, which Indian businessmen were not allowed to join. Workers for factories came from nearby districts. Jobless peasants and artisans worked in factories. Mill workers moved between the village and the city, returning to the village homes during harvests and festivals. Over time, workers traveled great distances in the hope of work in the mills. European managing agencies were interested in establishing tea and coffee plantations on land acquired at cheap rates from the colonial government, and they invested in mining, indigo and jute. Most of these were products required primarily for export trade and not for sale in India. When Indian businessmen set up industries, they did not compete with Manchester goods in the Indian market like yarn. The early cotton mills in India produced coarse cotton yarn thread rather than fabric. The yarn produced in Indian spinning mills was used by handloom weavers in India or exported to China. Export of Indian yarn to China declined since produced from Chinese and Japanese mills flooded the Chinese market. So industrialists in India began shifting from yarn to cloth production. Cotton piece goods production in India doubled between 1900 and 1912. During First World War, when British mills were busy with war production to meet the needs of the army, Manchester imports into India declined. Over the year, India's industrial production in India boomed. After the war, Manchester could never recapture its old position in the Indian market. While factory industries grew steadily after the war, small-scale production continued to dominate. In fact, in some instances, handicrafts handloom production actually expanded in the 20th century due to technological changes which did not push up costs. For example, use of fly shuttle in looms. Weavers of coarse cloth faced fluctuations in demand with bad harvests and famines. The demand for the finer varieties brought by the well-to-do was more stable. Famines did not affect the sale of Banarasi or Baluchari saris. Mills could not imitate specialized weavers. Weavers and artisans continued to lead a hard life. When new products are produced, people have to be persuaded to buy them. Consumer awareness can be created through advertisements which make products appear desirable and necessary. From the beginning of the industrial age, advertisements have played a part in expanding the markets for products and in shaping a new consumer culture. Manchester industrialists began using labels that make the place of manufacture and the name of the company familiar to the buyer. The label was also a mark of quality. When buyers saw "Made in Manchester" written in bold on the label, they were expected to feel confident about buying the cloth. Images of Indian gods and goddesses regularly appeared on the labels to give an impression of divine approval and also make the manufacture from a foreign land appear somewhat familiar to Indian people. By the late 19th century, manufacturers used printing calendars to popularize their products. Sometimes figures of important personages, of emperors and nawabs, adorned advertisements and calendars. The message very often seemed to say, "If you respect the royal figure, then respect this product." When the product was being used by kings or produced under royal command, its quality could not be questioned. When Indian manufacturers advertised, the nationalist message was clear and loud. If you care for the nation, then buy products that Indians produce. Advertisements became a vehicle of the nationalist message of Swadeshi.